there's no one way to do sensory storytime. Just like we talked last fall, there's no one model for special needs services at your library. What I love about Sensory Storytime is it's we can adapt it to our own community, to our own interests and our own specialities. So that's a little bit of what we'll talk about today. So why Sensory Storytime? I thought I would talk a little bit first about why you should bring a program or consider bringing a program like Sensory Storytime to your library. One of the first ways we, when I was at Deerfield, brought Sensory Storytime to our library, we were approached by several family members who asked us, do you have special programming for kids with special needs? I don't feel comfortable bringing my child to typical programs. Do you have anything separate? And then I went to an amazing webinar, perhaps some of you were there, or a seminar, a Lakeshore seminar with the Chicago Public Library, and they were presenting about how they trained their librarians about autism and how to develop programming for children with autism. And I was so inspired by that, and I really thought that this could be our niche in Glencoe. And so Sensory Storytime was born after I collaborated with our NSSED district, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But what are some of the reasons why you should or could develop Sensory Storytime in your library? To provide support and library services to an underserved group of your community. Patrons with special needs are underserved in all aspects of life, not just library services. So this would be another way to have them included in your community. To include children with special needs who might not otherwise be included in regular library programming, and I talked a little bit about that already. Some parents are just uncomfortable having their kids with typically developing children, maybe not because of anything that the library has did, maybe not because of anything the library has did, maybe they've had a negative experience elsewhere in the community, so they are bringing that experience to library services so they would feel comfortable with other children that are like their own children. But also another reason to have something like Sensory Storytime or a program for children with special needs, it's an opportunity to advocate for your library and its services to non-users. One of the things that we saw after Sensory Storytime was that we had a really increased desire of families with children with special needs to come to our library, to use our parenting collection, and utilize some other services that they just didn't know was even there. So it's a way to talk about what your whole library has to offer, not just children's services. Certainly to be responsive to your community's needs, so if you have family members coming to you asking for programming specifically for children with special needs, it's an opportunity to be responsive to that. And then certainly to fulfill your mission of your public library. As all of us in every public library, our job is to serve the entire community, and children with special needs really is part of that, and patients with special needs is part of that whole community. Sue, do you want to talk a little bit about how you got started with
Well, actually, Renee was my inspiration. I am Barbara Clipper. I attended a conference session with Renee, and it was just, she presented everything vertically down, and it was with these just step by step of what her Sensory Storytime, how it progressed. And it just seemed so accessible and doable. And of course, I left with a whole folder of exactly how to start and launch our own if we wanted to, and that's really, you were the catalyst.
Did you have any family members asking for?
Oh yeah. There were patrons in Plainfield, one mother in particular with twin boys who have autism, and they would come in, and she would, she clearly wanted her boys to have a library experience, but they clearly did not feel comfortable in the story times that were offered at that time. And so she encouraged me to come to an organization that she co-chairs, which is the Special Education Parent Teacher Association in the Plainfield School District, SEPTA for short. If you need any contact to help you in your own communities, her name is Lauren Longo. And of course, you can get my card, and I can put you in touch with her. That might be an easier way. And her sidekick is Christine Leffler, Loeffler. If you can find two people like these two women in my community, they are like the Rock of Gibraltar, channeling conduit to the community I'm seeking to serve. And they have been really wonderful. And it was they coming to me, and then with a request, and then your conference program that really helped.
It's amazing because when I reached out to our special ed district in Deerfield when I was there at the time, I was overwhelmed by the amount of support. So there are people in your community, whether it's a parent advocate or special ed teachers in your districts, that are willing to help because they know that their children are underserved. So they're willing to volunteer their time, do anything that they can to provide you resources to help you learn, and really take advantage of that too. There are so many other people, once you start looking, that will be able to help.
They're just Herculean heroes.
So I thought I'd talk a little bit about Sensory Storytime. This is not an official definition by any means. I don't think there is an official definition of what Sensory Storytime is, but I tried to come up with knowing what people like Barbara Clipper have done, knowing the type of programming that Holly has done here at the library, and also what I've tried to do and what other libraries have done. This is just a definition of what I think kind of encompasses Sensory Storytime. It's a library storytime program designed for children with autism, sensory processing disorder, or other special needs. So it's really kind of a huge catch-all. And it certainly involves music, stories, play with a focus on particular sensory elements. But you'll see today that our story times are different in the way that they are set up. We have different activities, we have different sensory opportunities. So really, this is just a model, and then if you were interested in developing something like this, you could develop it in a way that works best for your community. At Deerfield, we came up with several goals for our program. We applied for a grant through the Target Foundation, which actually is a really wonderful grant to acquire if your library hasn't acquired one already. They love supporting libraries. It's called the Early Childhood Literacy Grant through the Target Foundation. And we applied for a grant of $1,500, and that paid for some of our startup materials, sensory toys, manipulatives, some assistive chairs, and it also paid for Boardmaker, which we'll talk a little bit about. But in that grant process, we had to talk about goals. What is the goal of this program? It certainly supports children with special needs with the library program designed especially for them. And it really does engage all of the senses through music, movement, play, and stories. But it also teaches life skills, including the ability to transition between activities. Children with special needs often need or always need opportunities developing life skills, like the opportunity to share between another child or the opportunity to transition between one activity to another. Children with autism, if they don't know what to expect, they may feel a little less confident with the ability to transition. They may have a hard time making that transition. So developing something like Sensory Storytime with a lot of structure will offer that ability to give them life skills opportunities. And we at Deerfield had opportunities for social interaction with volunteer adults and teen volunteers as well. Certainly Sensory Storytime provides a supportive learning environment for an underserved population. It fosters literacy and the love of books, and it helps kids feel comfortable coming to the library, and it also provides networking opportunities for the parents. I'll talk a little bit about Deerfield's program, but it was a drop-in program where parents were able to enjoy the library on their own while their child was in the program with teen volunteers, with teacher volunteers. So they were able to have some me time, which is critical for any parent, I think, but also for parents with children with special needs. So we'll talk a little bit about our 3 different models, and even from Deerfield to Glencoe, for me, the sensory story times are completely different. So we'll talk about that, and I will open it up to Sue then also to talk about all the wonderful things she does at Plainfield. So I wanted to start first with talking about Deerfield, and I already have talked a little bit about how I got started. What we've done here is put together 3 models, and so you have a list of the program guidelines, and those are all of the details and the specifics about the program. How many children are allowed in the program, what was the length of the program, what was the title called, or the title of the program named, and also what audience it was for. Sensory Storytime at Deerfield, when we first created it, was for children with special needs, and it required advanced registration ahead of time. And parents called the library, emailed the library, put their child's name down for the program. And one of the things that we loved about this program was that we got all of the support from our NSSE district. And they were able to help me be trained. I observed some of their special ed classrooms, was able to see special ed teachers interact with children with special needs so that I can pick up some communication tips and some tips for reading stories. So they were a huge resource for me as well. And they also helped me develop a schedule of different types of activities that they thought would be beneficial for children with special needs. Mixing up stories with movement activity and then quiet time and calming time, all with putting together a structure or a schedule so that kids knew what to expect activity after activity was the way that we did it here at Deerfield. I have a program outline here, and you'll see each one of our programs is different in terms of what we start with. We may start with bubbles, we may start with play, or in Deerfield, we started with structure right away when they came into the program. When they came into the program, when they came into the door, they received their name tag. And this was something I picked up at a special ed classroom. Kids often check in at different stations around the special ed classroom with their name or a picture of themselves. So if they're checking into math time, they'll bring their picture or their name at the math table and they'll put it up on the board. So I wanted to incorporate that into Sensory Storytime, so I made name tags for all of the children and checked them into Storytime right when they walked into the door. And then after they checked into the wall, or checked into the main board on Storytime, they were given a schedule, which is a small schedule. You can see in the picture on the top right over there. Basically what that is a sheet of cardstock. I laminated on both sides and I put some Velcro pieces on it. And each Velcro piece has a little Boardmaker image attached to it, indicating what particular task or activity we were going to be doing. And I think Sue brought with her, which is so grateful. I'm so grateful she did. This is the Boardmaker software that we also purchased with applying with the grant money from the Target Foundation. Essentially what this is a software program that allows you access to the full picture vocabulary that children use in special ed classrooms. So children are already using something like Boardmaker in the classrooms already, so they're familiar with this picture system, but I think you don't necessarily even need Boardmaker, even if you were just to create a schedule with blown up images or pictures or clip art, something that is recognizable. I often use photographs because they're real life, so it's, children are able to connect the real life photograph with the real life image. So something like that would work too. Something like this is about, I believe it was 300 or so.
It's a lot less than it was a few years ago.
That's true, that's true. Yeah, and I bought back in 2011. So I used Boardmaker to create large pictures and small pictures, and then gave each child a small schedule to have with them so that their parent could review the schedule with them before the program even started. And then I took time to review the large group schedule when everybody was into the room, everybody was calm and ready for the story time. Certainly the most important element, although every element is important, of story time was the stories. But I didn't just read stories in a traditional sense that you would for a typical story time. I really tried to make sure that there were a lot of other opportunities, a lot of other ways that children experience the story, whether it was through pop-up or sensory books, and then I walked around the room to encourage children to feel or touch parts of the book. I incorporated flannel board stories, stories that I read out loud, and incorporated movement and had kids bring up pieces of the flannel board the flannel board story to the board. Big books were a really big hit, and then adapted stories. And then sometimes if the book just wasn't able to be adapted, or I wanted to try something new, I made extra copies of the stories or had them sent in from other libraries and made sure that each child had a copy of the story to read along with their caregiver as well. I always incorporate movement activities in my sensory story times, and there's a lot of different ways that I do this. And I know Sue is going to show you a lot of really great movement opportunities too. I use beanbag games often, so I got something like this from Lakeshore Learning, and these are really great beanbags. They're cleanable, wipeable, which are always a positive thing. But what I like about it is it has the word of the color on the front, and it has the word in Spanish on the back. So depending on what your community's needs are, you could certainly utilize these. I like to do different beanbag games like passing and not necessarily throwing, passing it to a partner, or having the beanbag spread out on the ground and then having kids go to the different colors and identify the different colored beanbags on the floor. Parachute activities were always popular. I always tried to do that at the end of the story time. And then it was just an opportunity for parents and caregivers and I to do that activity together. I would lead different motions, so we would do the parachute slow, we would do it fast, we would go up, we would go down, and I would do that verbally, and then kids would follow along. I did utilize songs, and in one of the packets that you picked up when you came in this morning is a post that I did for the ALS blog about using music with children with special needs. And I was a little hesitant about using music at first just because I had no idea how children would react. Every child is different, especially every child with special needs is different. So some children might enjoy music, others may not. Some children might participate in the movements that you're leading along, other children may not. And so I chose specific songs with the guidance of some of the special needs teachers. But also I found that songs like Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes was still really popular with body recognition. But I didn't often need to play that on a CD. I could just sing it out loud. But there were other songs that I utilized, and I believe I have those written down in the post for you. I love anything by Jim Gill. Jim Gill actually has a background working with kids with special needs, and so that really shows in his music. It's very thoughtful, and there's one song that I wrote about in that post, and I forget the name of it, but it's a very, very slow song where Jim Gill is singing and his voice goes up the scale and his voice goes down the scale. And so even for a child with limited movement and who may not be able to get up and dance and sing, if they have the ability to move their arms, they can participate even in a way of just moving their arms up and then moving their arms down as the song goes up the scale and the song goes down the scale. So there are just different ways you can utilize music with children with special needs. And Jim Gill is someone I definitely wanted to highlight as well. One of the things that we did for Sensory Storytime at Deerfield was we spent 30 minutes in Storytime activities, and then we spent about 20 minutes or so in structured play activities. And the structured play was around the room. We had different play stations so that kids could practice transitioning between different activities. We would spend about 5 or so minutes in each station. So we had different stations around the room, and there were also large Boardmaker pictures of that station. So we had a Play-Doh station with the Boardmaker image of Play-Doh. We had a craft station with a Boardmaker image of craft. And so the children would go around in rice tables. The children would spend about 5 minutes in each station, playing with themselves, playing with each other, practicing sharing, communicating with each other. These were all skills that they practiced while they were in these play stations. And then I went to Glencoe, and I really knew that I wanted to bring something like Sensory Storytime to Glencoe. I just didn't know how I was going to do it because I'm the only full-time person at Glencoe, and that is a challenge in and of itself, to be able to do something like Sensory Storytime, which I had so much time to devote to developing the program and then making that transition. So I wanted to make a partnership and bring someone else who could do it for me. And in a way I could collaborate with them to help develop a program similar to Sensory Storytime and what ended up being almost very similar to Sensory Storytime, but so that I wouldn't necessarily have to do it. But one of the organizations that I worked with when I was learning in Deerfield and just kind of gathering information about special needs and disability awareness was the group called Lakotech. And I know some of you in the room already have worked with them or you've heard of them. The National Lakotech Organization is a wonderful organization, and they're dedicated to including children with special needs in the community. And they offer play sessions, they offer a huge library of resources for professionals, and they also have a connection with Able Play, which is a library of disability-friendly toys and games. So even libraries like us could apply for a subscription to Lakotech's lending library and have Able toys or accessible toys be sent to our library, and then we could use them in programs in so many different ways. And so I learned about them when I was developing Sensory Storytime in Deerfield. And so I reached out to them when I started at Glencoe, and I said, you know, here's what I want to do. Is this something that you would be interested in doing? Do you have the means to do it? And what developed was Sensory Storytime in a different way. So I collaborated with a couple of their staff members in coming up with curriculum, is what they call it, storytime programs on a particular theme. I would select the books, and then they would come up with the activities and the sensory play that was related to that, that theme for that particular program. They're 1 hour long, and it's not just stories and play structured in different times. It's really intermittently, they go back and forth between stories and play and movement activities all the time. And then we decided to call it Sensory Storytime for Children of All Abilities, because they really focus on an inclusive audience. So we wanted to make sure that siblings felt comfortable coming. We wanted to make sure that friends felt comfortable coming. There was really an inclusive environment for all children, regardless of ability. And this particular program is funded by our Friends of the Library. Every time they come to the library, it's $200. And so our Friends of the Library is wonderful in supporting that for them to come to the library. And this is just a brief outline of the different things that they do in their program. What I love about them is that they have a really great knack of coming up with extension activities out of a story. So I'll just give them a list of 3 stories to do. We did a food themed story time, we did a bedtime themed story time, and they'll come up with different activities. So for example, eating the alphabet, this just happened on Saturday. They took pictures, or they printed pictures of all the different foods and vegetables and fruits in that story, and kids got to bring up that picture to the board every time that they got to that particular food in the story. Something like Llama Llama Red Pajama, they all decorated their own llamas in their own way, and then they brought up, they had a big bed, you can see in that poster up there, they brought the llamas up to the board and put the llamas to sleep. They also incorporate sensory play, which I really like, because they bring everything in and they take it away. So I don't have anywhere to store this stuff in my library. It's such a small library. So for those of you smaller libraries, I totally understand. It can be hard when you're developing a new program like this, because you want to buy all of this stuff, but then where do you put it? So something like Sensory Storytime with Lakeshore Tech, they have all of the supplies and the toys, and then they bring it in and they take it out when they're done. So they've done digging in sand bins, they've done water play. The top right is a play kitchen with applesauce for a fall themed story time with leaves and pumpkins. But they always try to incorporate movement activity too. So in our fall themed story time, they did pumpkin rolling. They always do a parachute, which is really fun. They've made leaves, they always do a craft. And then you can see there's that letter matching again. They have a lot of experience with working with children with special needs because of the play sessions and the programming that they've developed. I know that they worked very closely with Holly Jen here at the Skokie Library before they ever even came to Glencoe. So they're getting more and more experience working in libraries, and they have such a wonderful ability to connect with parents and children with special needs.
And the spark for me, I was remembering as I was sitting here, was a youth breakfast, youth services breakfast at, I think it was ALA, I can't remember what conference, but Holly Jin was awarded, you received an award. Do you remember? And I was so excited about what I heard about what you had done that afterwards I ran over to just talk to you a little bit about everything that I had heard you had done. And you were very kind to me, and you told me that I absolutely could start something in Plainfield. You probably don't remember that because, you know, when you're in that moment, but I just wanted to back up and make sure I mentioned that spark, and thank you for that.
Thank you.
In Plainfield, we have, I have limited funds and very limited space. So I'm always trying to do the most that I can with my own talents and ideas for as little expense and space as possible. So I would just like to underscore everything here that I'm going to say with the most important thing I think we bring to a sensory story time or to our profession is ourselves. So when I get ready to step into that room, I just do a check with myself on, I do the centering. It's a really quick trick because I get nervous, and I'm nervous now. So I just imagine a pendulum. I don't know if any of you have been to the Franklin Museum in Philadelphia, but there are other pendulums like that that come all the way down from the like third or fourth floor. And this gorgeous cable comes all the way down through the whole center of the Franklin Museum to the bottom, and there's this huge gold ball of brass or whatever, and it shows that the Earth is round. Right. So I imagine that whole cable coming right down through my head and then back up again. And I find that in that much time, I'm centered, I'm much more relaxed and ready to go, because that's what all people, and children especially, but especially children who have special needs, they're like Geiger counters. And if they sense that I'm not really aware and not really there in that moment, it's a bad launching moment. So I just wanted to say that 99% of what I think is our success is what we bring to that initial moment of coming into a program. So in Plainfield, we do monthly programs. Scheduling is always a bear. I never know if I'm doing the right thing. But obviously, weekdays are out for our population. Saturday mornings are not good because there's a really wonderful special park district activity. I forget the whole name for it, but and the children are really active in that. And we have basketball and soccer and all kinds of wonderful activities in the morning. So we went with Saturday from 1 to 2. I'm still not convinced it's a good time, but I don't know what other time there is. So you just go with what, you know, the least difficult of all the options. And it's an hour long. And I used to do a structured beginning and play at the end. And I find that it's really hard for parents to get places on time. And I had so many stragglers, and with this population, it's even, I think it might be even harder. And so I put the play at the beginning to compensate for all of the interruptive late arrivals. And the audience is, and it's 15 to 20 minutes, but I'm flexible depending. I really play a lot by ear depending on the room. If I see that it's like melting down, I'll go into a structured program. If I see that everyone's really happy doing what they're doing and naturally socializing, I just let that unfold, but then I have enough time to move into the structured program. It's a drop-in. I decided to go drop-in because I'm building the program. I don't want restrictions. So, and that's been fine. We average maybe 10 per story time. That's 10 children and then the parents. The program title is Sensory Storytime. So there's playtime with activity stations. There's a cleanup song, which is just, now, it's here we go around the mulberry bush. And it's, now it's time to pick up the toys, pick up the toys, pick up the toys. Now it's time to pick up the toys and put them all away. Would you please help me pick up the toys? Would you please help me pick up the toys? And then I just sing it again. And everyone comes and we all pick up. And I don't rush it. There's no rush. You don't have to be crazy about picking up the toys. It's a good time to say hello again and interact. And then we pick up the toys, and then when all that's done, the segue moments are really important because that's when you can all fall through the cracks. So I'm like, oh, I go and I sit down, and I'm just like, everybody sit down, sit down, sit down, everybody sit down on the floor. My mama's a little big girl, shut your door. Not on the ceiling, not on the door. Everybody sit down on the floor. I'll sit down. And then I said, this is what we're going to do today, and we go through the Boardmaker. That will come up in a slide. And then hello with my pet bird. If they're still a lot of commotion and I'm losing them. This is Pájaro. He likes quiet. If you sit still, maybe we can share Pájaro together. We pass it. Sharing is really important, like you can do with bean bags, pass the bean bag. Or they like this because, and this Lauren Longo, that parent, she gave me her weighted bird. She told me she found this at Hobby Lobby, but this is Pájaro. They love Pájaro. I had no idea they would just look like flip over this bird. So this is, I'm afraid I'll lose him. But that is a great way, if nothing else is working. Well, I use Pájaro all the time anyway now but it will focus them if they're unfocused. And then the welcome ball. This is a great item. I use it now for all my story times. This is so true in so many ways. When the American Disability Act was passed, we found out that it, of course, was wonderful for all human beings. Because mothers with strollers, people who've broken their legs, people who have arthritis, and just like encompass so many people who have difficulty opening a door or whatever. And we find also, I think, with Sensory Storytimes, I love the title of Children with All Abilities. Because I wanted to make sure siblings came, but it just got too long. Yes, bring your siblings. Oh, and if you have friends. But children, it's open to children of all abilities, but it's designed for children with special needs. And this ball is a great tool. I use it to find out names and to repeat names as a way of getting to know each other. And then we segue into the book. I think we're missing book. After the welcome ball, we go to the book and the story. And I do it, Lori Berkner, these are my glasses. I use song for everything. I find that, a cappella singing somehow causes language to flow in a calm way. I find I haven't found any adverse reaction to song. And then we do the book, and then the extension activities, flannels, anything that's tactile, and then a movement activity, a milestone moment. I've incorporated this in all my story times now just to mark milestone moments for parents as well as children. Parents, it's a heck of a job. It's a heck of an endeavor. And milestone moments, I like to recognize having reached them, having lived to reach that moment, and then the goodbye song. So that's it. And there's how we start. It looks kind of messy. I'm kind of an organized person, but that's representative of really me. I'm sure it can be better, but I can't seem to pull it off. But I'm gonna try what you've done, is make the vertical and hand that out to every parent. That's a great idea. But that's my Boardmaker up there. I have one that's not cut up that I leave on the left. And on the top, it's free play and squishy balls. These are wonderful. They should light up. And then we move into what I just described, the welcome. And as we go through each one, I take it down on the right so they can see how we're progressing. Now we're doing this, then that, hello. And then I put the words up there for parents. Hello, my friends. Hello, my friends. Or hello, friends. It's to goodnight, ladies. This is what the Storytime area looks like. Do we have a square where a slide that shows when they walk in the room?
I don't think we need one.
Okay. When they walk in the room, this is what they, you can go to the next slide, that's great. I have like 5 of this in the room just laid out on one half of the room. And then the previous slide that showed the Storytime area is the other half of the room. And so then when they walk through the door, there are 2 doors to this large meeting room, and they walk into the free activities. And I adore this guy, Hervé Toulet. He's like my current obsession. He's like the most wonderful, and you can just play with these books. And I figured it might inspire coloring and drawing and any mishmash hodgepodge. He's wonderful. Patterns, the game of patterns, the game of let's go, which is kind of a felty, you know, and they can use their finger and just follow the path and maybe be inspired to do art. So I put these books by every piece of cardboard. I hate that blue plastic. I just don't want to use blue. I know I should, but I get these enormous pieces of cardboard instead, and I mean, I don't think they're going to color outside the cardboard. They haven't yet. This is Aubrey. She's obsessed with leading Storytime. When she comes, she is the leader. Look at that face. And that's just how she looks at you. I am in charge, and here is my story. She's magnificent. The only problem is she doesn't like to give it up. So she and I have an understanding. We work together in leading Storytime.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Okay, there we go. And there's the room. That kind of gives you the idea of the free play. And that's Vivian, who is very vivacious. And I hide things in the bean bins. I put all kinds of cute things in there. The Special Education Parent-Teacher Association brought these in. Balloons filled with cornstarch, little balloons filled with rice, and there are lentils in here, and they just sewed it and brought me like 10 of these and just offered them, you know, and those are lap weights that apparently calm. They're just calming. Just put them in the lap, and the child knows to stay put. It looks like this is what you have as well. Mm-hmm. Is it for squeezing?
It's also for sorting too. We have, when we had the stations, we had different sorting bins, so they could, I got these from Boardmaker. I'm going to move Poplar so you can see. These are from, not Boardmaker, Lakeshore Learning. You buy them in a pack of 4, and they come with 4 different colored bins. And then you can have all of the colors out mixed together, and then the kids sort the objects by color. These are also from Boardmaker or Lakeshore Learning. I really like these a lot. What I like about them are several things. They're colorful, they make different noises, they really give different sensory experiences, but also they're very tight seals. I always have to be careful with what I make myself. The ones you showed are perfect, but it's important that they have tight seals too, because you don't want something like the rice, or if it's small and chokeable, to come out. So they're through. These are through Lakeshore Learning. I love it. And they come in packs of, I think there's 5 altogether that come.
And how much roughly?
I think it was about 40. But if you have a coupon, they're easily findable on Google. You can use a coupon too. I don't know if we talked about these. Do you want to talk about these? Okay. Boardmaker not only makes the software for the PECs or the different images that the kids use in their in schedules, but they also make adapted stories. So when you order Boardmaker, I don't know if you got these when
they were donated.
They were donated. That's so wonderful. These are stories that come along with your purchase of Boardmaker software, and there are all different kinds of stories. So this is the Wheels on the Bus. So this particular one is a song. I know at Deerfield there are a couple too, I think different folk and fairy tales, but the pieces come out. So the kids are able to engage with the story and practice putting the pieces in the different parts of the story. I love these because oftentimes children with autism, for example, they just need something to fidget with. They need something in their hands to feel calm or just to do something else. And something like this, having different pieces together, it's just a really engaging way to share a story, another type of adapted story.
And I put those out at the beginning for the free play with the parent. That glitter bottle is our equivalent of something, you know, that goes up and down. I'm trying to remember what the liquid, she told me the liquid was. Does anyone know? I can't remember. It's viscous and
Carob syrup?
I was gonna say carob syrup, yes. I think that is it. And then you put glitter in there, and food coloring, and then it make sure it's tightly sealed, and it's shaken, and the glitter, and it can occupy a child during story time and calm her while she listens. So that, and the touch and tell box is something that I think I got from Barbara Clipper, or a blog, and I was just reading it, and I thought, well, I've got this box, and I just took it right there, and I said, touch and tell, what's in the box, describe what you feel, and I made 2 folds, and put duct tape there so we don't hurt ourselves. I'm horrible with crafts. This is about the best I can do. And then you put your hand in there, and you feel what's in there. For example, this is what I have in there. It's soft, and you describe what you feel. Rubber duckies, or whatever you have. And that's the touch and tell box. And also the snow. I mean, I'd never heard of it, but I'm like, I just went to the business office and dumped it in a bin, and indeed they went and they loved it.
That's all it is?
Yeah, it's just shredded paper.
You didn't hide anything?
No, but I should. Great idea.
Is it messy?
Yeah, well, you know, yeah, I mean, it's a little bit, you know, it's better than sand. And yeah, it just goes on that. I do use the blue plastic for that. I just don't like to draw or color on plastic. It's like an oxymoron to being artistic.
And about crafts too, if I could add one thing, I really like crafts that don't have a particular end product. Often open-ended crafts work best. So in a previous slide, I had a picture of a craft table. I had pictures, coloring sheets of birds, and then I had just feathers and crayons. The larger fat crayons work really well, or the crayons that are in the shape of a triangle so that they can be gripped more easily. Those work well, but anything that's open-ended I think works really well for children with special needs too. Just something to so I think this is a good segue to talk a little bit about what we've learned. And I am continually inspired by and learn so much from kids about what they can do. It's not about what children with special needs can't do. I really try and focus on all of their abilities. Some of the things that I learned when I first started Sensory Storytime was really, for me, to be patient and to wait. I think that that's key, not only our delivery of directions during Sensory Storytime or reading, but also just letting children process on their own time and letting them experience things in their own way. So it's important to be patient, but it's also okay for us to fail. I mean, if something doesn't work, I've read many a story in Sensory Storytime where this story was just not going over well, and so we were halfway through, and I said, you know, I think we're going to end this story now. Let's go over to the schedule and see what's next. And that is okay. That really is okay. I think opportunities for failure are great opportunities to learn, too, about what works and what doesn't. And I also have a couple other ones, too. Minimize distractions in the room. One of our Storytime room at Deerfield, when I was there, had a lot of stuff in it. It was not only just the program room, it was the closet room, it was the storage room, as many of your program rooms probably are. So I really had to put everything away, cover things up, make sure that the room itself was a blank canvas, so that when children come to the program, they're thoughtful and they can really focus on the activities that you have to share with them. So I worked on minimizing distractions, and I still do that in our current story time. And then also a little bit about control. You realize you can't control everything. You can't control a child's reaction to a story. You can't control their reaction to a song or an activity, and that's okay. I think part of this learning for me has been realizing that you can't control every outcome, you can't control every child, and that is really okay too, because our job is to really make sure that all children are included and give them that experience, give them that library experience that is typical for other children without special needs too. I don't know if you had anything else. What have you learned?
I've learned that a whole lot, you know, that we are a mirror. So, you know, it's just back to what I opened with. I think it's really important to be ready myself for sensory story time, to be ready for anything. There have been some really disastrous moments. I mean, what would qualify as disastrous moments in a normal situation? But I've had disastrous moments in a normal situation as well. But just runaway children, siblings who both had autism, and another sibling who was older and absolutely mortified to be there, an older brother, and a father who, it was all way beyond what he could handle. So that was one of the most uncontrollable situations. And what I did in that moment was I was flexible, and a lot of times I think we have a lot in ourselves to rely on and to trust and have faith that we'll know what to do in that situation, because you can't predict it. But what I did was I remained calm, and I wanted to make sure no one got hurt, because these two children were running pretty wildly. And so I went over to the father, I patted the older brother and found a chair for him and handed him a book so that he would be in his own place and not feel self-conscious. And then I got a smaller parachute that I had, which is also be ready. I always have these little, like, pájaro or a smaller parachute, or, you know, something in the event that. And we opened that parachute up, and I thought, let's just calm them with the parachute in a calming fashion, just very calming. And it worked. Those two children went right under the parachute, and they just ran in under it. At least it was like a way to contain. I don't know if that ceiling was too high, or if the lights bothered, or what it was. But that parachute gave them this little shelter, this little canopy that they needed to calm down. And then all of us went down with the parachute. And then we sat on the parachute. I think I did a peekaboo or something and then we moved on from there. But those are the kinds of situations that happen.
Well, and I think too, redefining success, I talked a little bit about this in the fall. If you don't have a full program, maybe you're expecting 20 children and you get 4, and that's okay, because you are making a difference just by offering the program, something that your library may have never done before. And these 4 families have come to your library, and so that in and of itself is a success. And I find that parents with children with special needs, caregivers, everyone is so grateful in this community, not only the people that we collaborate with, but the people that we're serving. They are just happy to have their child included. So really, if there's any reason to do something like this, I think that's the reason. So.